Hey guys, welcome back to Andy's Dinosaur Reviews, and today we are going to take a look at a very old figure, but a wonderful figure. Especially if you're around my age, then you probably have some very fond memories of this figure. This is the Jurassic Park and actually Lost World Jurassic Park Kenner Velociraptor figure. This one here is the, I think, Series 1 Velociraptor of Jurassic Park, and this one was the Series 1 that they basically re-released the figure with a different paint job of the Lost World Jurassic Park, or I'm pretty sure that's the way that works. I actually had this figure. I think this one specifically is the one I've had since I was a child, so it's really been in my collection for a very long time. This one here I picked up fairly recently in a lot on eBay, so it's a new addition to my collection and I am quite psyched to have it. And I was recently thinking I review a lot of Jurassic Park stuff, a lot of Jurassic World stuff, but I haven't ever gotten into the Kenner stuff as far as reviews go, so I thought why not, I might as well start reviewing some of those as well and see how this review and a few others go, I guess, and see if there is interest in checking out the older Kenner figures, and then maybe we'll continue on with some of those figures as we go. But again, these figures, I had specifically this one when I was a child and I absolutely loved it. Again, by today's standards, it's not really up to what we see as far as Jurassic Park style sculpts or Jurassic World sculpts, but for its time, it was an absolutely awesome figure, and I still am 100% in love with it. So let's go ahead and get a closer look at both of these Velociraptors right now. So we will start out with the original version, and you can see that as far as the detailing on the head sculpt, it does look really good. There is quite a bit of wonderful detail packed and sculpted all over the place in the head sculpt. You can see the nostrils are nicely sculpted out right there. The detailing in the eye and the eye socket area is also really nicely done. And I think they did a pretty darn good job, honestly, of replicating the actual Jurassic Park style Velociraptor paint job in toy form with this, even to the point of having like the eyes actually look pretty close as far as the coloration they've used. So Kenner did do a really good job, I think, in that aspect, especially when we look at newer figures like the Mattel releases. A lot of the time they release figures that have really accurate looking sculpts, but the paint jobs are just not really what you see in the film. But with this figure specifically, as far as Kenner goes, I think the sculpt for its time was pretty close to what a Jurassic Park Velociraptor looked like, and also the paint job as well. You can see that the jaw is articulated, of course, that is part of the action feature. The teeth are pretty big and bulky, but they look decent enough for sure, and you can see that each tooth appears to be sculpted individually, and even looking here on the inside, the teeth are painted really well. I don't really see any sloppiness, honestly, maybe a very small amount, but it is almost completely non-existent as far as that goes. You can also take note to the tongue in there, but that's as far as the jaw opens, so you can't really see it too well. It's all painted in there with a pretty realistic looking pinkish type of a coloration. The paint here of the body is basically just a brown, and then it's got some black that kind of leaks down here onto the head. And again, you've got that really nice green eye with that slit style pupil. Not perfectly replicating what the Jurassic Park Velociraptors look like, but again, it's pretty close, I will say that. And then here on the underside, which even the underside sports some really nice detail. You can see it has like a light gray. And then as we move down the body into the neck, you can see lots of really beautiful skin detail in the neck region. Lots of wonderful textured skin. And then as we get up here, you can also take note to the spinal column that does run down the figure. Moving down into the body itself, you don't see too much going on as far as like things like the shoulder blade or anything like you would see more often today, but I think it still, again, is absolutely awesome. The detailing of the arm is definitely very Jurassic Park Velociraptor-ish, and the skin texture as we move down the arm looks really good. You can also pick up on some little hints of the musculature. The hands look really nice as well. And one thing that we don't see too often anymore, but we did see all the time back in the day, is fingernail paint, and that rocks. Again, Kenner was just the best back in the day, and that's one of the reasons I think nowadays that we can look back and really appreciate how good Kenner was, is simply because they did go the extra mile and actually include paint on their nails, which Mattel currently does seem to skimp out on. Not saying anything bad about Mattel, because I absolutely love the Jurassic World line, but if they could just start adding fingernail paint and toenail paint it would just be so much better. Moving up here into the body, again, you can see some really nice skin texture. The overall sculpting of the skin texture, in my opinion, is really beautifully done. Lots of creasing and everything throughout the skin. You can definitely see some really nicely defined musculature as we move down the leg. And in fact, the entire leg sculpt is just really nicely done. You can see the kneecap there in the front. Coming down into the foot sculpt also looks really beautiful. You've got the nails nicely painted once again, beautiful sickle claw. Again, a little short and stocky in comparison to what it should look like, but this was just a toy, so it's not too big of a deal. And then moving back up here into the tail, again, that really nice skin texture leads out the length of the tail to a really beautiful point. And you have kind of like this black striping that leads all throughout pretty much the entire body. Same deal here on the legs, the black stripes in, and it looks really nice. And again, another thing that's really good about the Kenner figures is you can see the paint runs all the way out through the tail, which is another thing that we see more often than not skimped out on when it comes to the current Mattel figures. Another thing that I also liked more so about Kenner, I think I could say, is the fact that you can see the underbelly color here actually runs the entire length of the tail as well, all throughout the stomach, all the way up here onto the underside of the jaw, and even down here onto the insides of the legs. So they did do just a tremendous job, honestly, on the overall paint. I think that Mattel wins it when it comes to the overall accuracy of the sculpts, but Kenner definitely wins it when it comes to the actual paint applications of their figures. And again, being kind of a neutral position, you're not really going to see much difference on this side as opposed to the previous side when it comes to the sculpting or detail. It all looks pretty much the same. Now, I did state that this is the Lost World version, and the differences are not in the sculpt from what I can tell. It's pretty much just the coloration. So now with this one, you can tell, especially when I hold the two together, the previous one had a really nice darker brown that was more Jurassic Park-ish. This one has like a reddish brown, which isn't really exactly the Lost World type style. It's more of like an orange on the actual raptors in the film, but I think it's definitely much closer to resembling a Lost World style raptor than the older version. So primarily you have like this reddish brown, and then you have that black that kind of leaks down and stripes down, which is actually fairly similar to the Lost World raptors, and again runs out the entire length of the tail. Really beautiful paintwork. You also have the black that stripes here along the legs and even down here. The nails are painted now with like a light gray. Same deal with the nails up here on the hands, whereas the previous version had like black nails. The inside of the mouth has a slightly different coloration as far as the tongue goes. You can see it's more of like a pale type of a purple almost type of a coloration, and you've got the really nicely painted teeth. Again, they look pretty good, but you can also see that the teeth are a little sloppier now as far as the paintwork goes. They were a little more precise on the older release. And the eye is a yellowish type of a coloration now with a black pupil, whereas previously it was a green. And then you also have this white underbelly, which it's kind of like this, almost like a bluish green right here in the throat region, which is definitely not something that I can recall being on the Lost World Raptors. But once you get down here into the stomach region, you can see it turns into a white as opposed to like that light gray that was on the other one. And this one really goes up pretty far into the stomach and kind of stripes up in its own right, whereas the previous version did not do that. So there are some significant differences as far as the paintwork goes, but I do believe the sculpt is exactly the same. As far as articulation on these figures, you've got the neck articulation, you have the jaw, which is actually the upper jaw that moves. You also have arm articulation right there in the shoulder area. You have hip articulation. And then you can swivel the tail. A good amount of articulation in this figure for its time. And then the action feature is basically you squeeze the legs and it's going to have the raptor attack and chomp down. My older one here does still perform the action feature, but you can see his bite is really a lot weaker. I don't know if it was always like that. He almost doesn't even open his mouth. Maybe it's just some wear and tear from time kind of overtaking my raptor. But regardless, let's get a size on these raptors. So we'll bring this one out and get a size on that one because they are the exact same figure, just different colors. So from the tail to the head, you're looking at about 9 inches or 23 centimeters, and it fell over. And then if we actually stand it up and we get a measurement to the top of the head there, about 4 inches or 10 centimeters. And you can see that the raptors can actually balance fairly well as far as standing on their feet. And that is interesting because looking at the feet, those feet are not oversized like you see on Mattel figures, they were actually actually maybe even a little too small, I think, for the dinosaur, but it can still balance. However, it probably doesn't balance quite as well as you would see on a Mattel figure, just because this one might be able to fall over if you bump into the table, and Mattel might hold up, but they're not too far off, honestly. As far as a size comparison goes, the usual, we've got the Attack Pack Colovosaurus, Robert Muldoon over there with his buddy the Velociraptor, and Mr. Papo T-Rex. And hopefully next to these figures you can tell that even with the smaller Jurassic Park figures, they still did have some pretty darn good size, because those raptors are not small by any means. Looking at that Attack Pack figure there, next to them, you can really tell that even the smaller Jurassic Park figures were quite larger than the Attack Pack figures of today, but they still aren't gigantic or anything like that, still smaller as far as the Jurassic Park Kenner line goes, and hopefully next to these figures, you'll have a pretty good idea of that. So these Kenner Jurassic Park Series 1 and Lost World Jurassic Park Series 1 Velociraptor figures are both great. I absolutely love them. I always have, and I always will. They have always held a very, very soft spot in my heart, because it's exactly the exact figure that I played with so often when I was a child. When Jurassic Park was coming out, I was obsessed with Jurassic Park. When the Kenner toy line came out, I was obsessed with the Kenner toy line. I just constantly, all the time, either wanted to get a hold of the figures or just played with the ones that I had. So these figures were a big part of my life, or at least the Jurassic Park one was when I was growing up. Definitely a big, big part of my childhood. So this sculpt specifically will always have a very, very strong soft spot in my heart, a place for them, as long as my heart is still beating. But even by today's standards, I really think it's a really good looking Velociraptor figure. It's maybe not quite as highly detailed as you might see nowadays, but for its time, it really does sport some beautiful detailing, really, really nice skin texture, and the overall sculpting is fairly close to what you would see on a Jurassic Park Velociraptor. It's not perfect, that's for sure, but it's also not that far off. And even the paint jobs of both are sort of similar to what you would see on those versions in the films, so that's also a plus. And again, when it comes to the Kenner figures, I really am not just a big fan of the sculpts, but the fact that they included so much more paint back then on their figures. You can see that the paint runs all the way out onto the tail, and look at how much of a difference that makes in comparison to the Mattel line currently. We always see the paint kind of stop right there when it gets to the tail. I mean, occasionally you do see something different. They will include tail paint on some figures, but just alone with these two, it looks so much better when you can actually see the paint run all the way out onto the tail. And when you see that paint on the underside of the figure actually run the entire length of the figure, I really think that that is just an awesome touch to these dinosaur figures. And even the nail paint is just super cool to see. Something that, again, more often than not, most companies nowadays kind of skimp out on. Not just Mattel, as we've seen that same thing from time to time with the Lantern Toys figures, like the Primal Clash figures and Jurassic Clash. You see those figures occasionally get kind of skimped out on when it comes to nail paint. The Mattel line, the Zuru Toys lines, they just kind of don't care about nail paint anymore on a lot of their figures, and I don't understand why, because I really feel like it makes a world of difference when it comes to just how good the figure actually looks, and you can really tell just by looking at these old Kenner Raptors that that is completely true. The paint jobs on both are really the only difference, because again, they are the same sculpt. So, in a way, they're just repaints, which a lot of people nowadays tend to complain about repaints, but personally, I've always been a big fan, and having the two of these together makes them look so cool. Looks like kind of like a pack of raptors. If I could grab a couple more of these and put them together, it would really create quite the cool effect and cool appearance as far as I'm concerned, making a pack of Jurassic Park Velociraptors. Definitely awesome. So again, if you do want to pick these up, they're really not that expensive. Most times you can find them on eBay because they were extremely abundant back in the day, and getting a hold of one isn't too horribly complicated or anything like that. They usually are fairly readily available on eBay, and they don't normally cost too much to get a hold of. Being discontinued and out of production now for probably over 20 some years, they're a little beat up from time to time, but Even still, you can actually find some mint ones in package on eBay, but those ones are going to be a good bit more expensive. Regardless, absolutely fantastic figures. I highly recommend anybody that is interested in picking these up that does not already own them to do just that. Search them out on eBay. I will try to find links to where I can link you guys to purchase some. Don't know how cheap they'll be. It's been a while since I actually bought one individually, so I'll do my best. But regardless, make sure if you are interested, you pick these up at some point. And also, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you in the next review. Thanks for watching.